I was quite excited for season 2 of Squid Games, only to be left feeling extremely empty by the end. It barely felt like I had watched a full season of a show, and yet it felt like the season 2 was just tailing my balls trying to get me excited for the inevitable season 3. With season 1 taking the world by storm and quickly becoming Netflix's biggest TV series they ever produced, season 2 coming was inevitable. The final of season 1 easily left the door open for a sequel, and now we're finally here. Netflix finally dropped their long-awaited season 2, and it's safe to say that everybody was waiting in excitement for the continuation of Ji-Hoon's story. The season 2 of Squid Games racked up 68 million views in its premiere week. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the producer had something to live up to with so much hype surrounding both seasons. But in my opinion, this season mostly only serves to prolong the inevitable season 3, which is the true continuation of season 1. While I mainly will be critiquing the story of season 2, let's first take a look at what it actually did correctly. While my overall experience with season 2 might be negative, it's actually only the stretch between episode 2 and 6 that I have a problem with. Episode 1 and 7 are actually quite good, and that's probably because they are the only episodes that actually feels like it gives us something new that makes the story move forward. I think the most frustrating thing about this season is actually that I really liked the last episode, and then it just leaves me with a cliffhanger. Like, I genuinely wanted more once we got to the actual meat of the story. This is the episode that had the bathroom fight scene, the twist with the sailor, and the rebellion of the players. It was stacked with so many twists and turns and character progression that made the whole episode so good. Ji-Hoon must have felt so good finally being in a position of power, only to be bamboozled in the end. And the best part is that he doesn't even know that yet. This is the only episode that felt like it was trying to replicate a plot point from season 1, only to turn it completely upside down and make it much better than what I was expecting. Getting me so excited while only showing half of the games, which was the main draw of the series, is really amazing. First episode is also great, starting right where we left off before showing us what Ji-Hoon had been up to for the last few years. His new determined, jaded self seems to be perfect character foil, as Squid Game now also challenges the previous beliefs that he had established. In general, I think season 2 takes a much more nuanced approach than what I thought it would. Ji-Hoon gets repeatedly challenged on his beliefs, both from the salesman as well as the frontman, who insists that the players really want this, even though he's constantly interfering and purposely setting up the games to try and prove Ji-Hoon wrong. Speaking of which, my favorite scenes are definitely the bread and lottery scene, along with the climactic Russian roulette by the end. Seeing the salesman proving his own warped approval of the games in the form of taunting the homeless with a choice is so sinister. While it may at first hand just seems like he proves the greed and desperation of humans as seen before, he also proves that this desire for long-term wealth is much more alluring than the temporary satisfaction of hunger. Even if the change for wealth and actually changing their lives is small, it still sounds better than the alternative. The alternative being only prolonging their miserable lives that seemingly have no better days ahead. I love that season 2 doesn't just try to hammer home the same point as season 1, but instead builds upon the ideas that were already there. But that also about does it. So let's now talk about what the problems are with the series. I don't necessarily hate any of the characters in season 2, I just think there's a bit too many for its own good. Season 1 had a good amount of characters to focus on, making them all memorable and giving them their own time to shine. But season 2 has so many characters that our own main character, which is essential to the whole premise of the season, mostly gets thrown into the background this season. He only gets to shine in the first episode and towards the end of the rebellion, but that doesn't mean the cast isn't good. While I cringed at first with Thanos, I grew to really appreciate his character and enjoy it every time he was on screen. He's supposed to be this stereotypical bully archetype, but he's an over-exaggerated corny rapper which just makes for some of the funniest scenes I've ever seen. The characters that stand out to me in particular are the salesman, the frontman, Jungbae, Yongsik, Yomjae, Hyunju, Myungji, and Junhee. Now that might sound like a lot of characters I like, but that's actually half the cast. While making this video I had to make sure I didn't forget any, and I was actually surprised seeing faces I totally forgot about. Like, we seriously could do without the whole psycho shaman lady. I don't understand how she hasn't died yet, and she doesn't add anything to the story, and she just appears here and there to remind people that she's fucking weird. Simai is a character that I don't really have any strong feelings towards, but she doesn't offer anything before she just dies. I guess her death is supposed to act as foil for Min-Soo to grow, but am I supposed to feel bad for this guy? He's just a really shy pushover, and the second the person who stood up for him the entire time gets into a dire situation, all he can do is get an assist on the kill. Like, what the fuck, man? Then there is Gyeong-Shuk. And honestly, I don't really hate or like him. He's just kind of there. Yeah, his story isn't more interesting than any of the others, and he doesn't contribute anything in the overall story. He has one interesting connection to one of the guards, but that doesn't lead anywhere, and I bet his fate is left open at the end of the series for a reason, because there's no way we have two people who actually know each other from each side of the conflict, and they just never interact. There are also some other characters I didn't mention that actually plays roles in other subplots, but that ties into the next section. The pacing this season feels fucking awful. We are down in episodes, going from 9 episodes in season 1 to 7 episodes in season 2, and yet it feels like barely anything transpired that was set up. Season 2 spent so much time doing nothing, and the main reasons for this are the random subplots that lead nowhere and the introduction of the continuous voting system that eats up so much screen time. The first episode does a great job of setting up a story that I'm genuinely interested in, but the rest of the season just feels like a drag. While Gi-hun finds himself stuck in the games again, he has a group of mercenaries along with the brother of the frontman searching for him, but all of the scenes amount to nothing. It's just them sailing around in circles because the captain is doing a bit of tomfoolery on them, but it's only the last episode we found out that he's a traitor, and that's why they can't get anywhere with the search. None of the characters in this subplot has any interesting interaction at all, and they just feel like filler when they're on screen. They just end up dragging the pace without going anywhere. The second subplot is organ harvesting behind the scenes, but it barely gets any screen time and just detracts from the main story. The scenes just feel so shoehorned in for no reason, and they don't tell us anything new that we didn't already know from season 1. But that's not even the worst part. When they first had to start voting again, I was like, oh, of course. We just gotta do this again to set up the groundwork for the premise again. I get it, but boy was I wrong. They should rename it Squid Voting, with how much fucking voting there is in this season. I like the idea behind it, like showing that humans are inherently more interested in the personal interest rather than any moral high ground that is to benefit the greater good. I think the salesman scene outside where he taunts the poor homeless people adds even more depth and nuance to this angle. But it has no business taking up this much screen time and not even making it remotely interesting after the first voting. I think that all of the problems this season suffers from is actually that it's split in 2 seasons when it should have been condensed into one really strong and concise season. The first episode is so good and sets the season up in a refreshing way so it doesn't just feel like a copycat. But instead of following through, it seems we're just slowly dancing around the main plot only to pick it right back up at the end so you'll stay for the inevitable season 3. With that being said, I would be lying if I said I wasn't interested in seeing where it all goes and what the conclusion becomes. Letting Gi-hun and the officer trying to find his brother melt into the background was probably the worst idea. If the frontman wasn't part of the games as a mole this time around, it would be unwatchable. But thankfully he is here to take all the attention, and damn is he good at it. Placing a mold, but this time we're actually aware of it, adds so many layers to every interaction he has. It's definitely the best thing about this season and ends up saving what could have been a dragging replica of its predecessor. I think that more focus on a core cast of characters and a more concise approach to the overall story would have worked much better. Overall, it's just the branding of it being its own season that mostly does the setup without much payoff that makes the season feel so incomplete. This season feels like a prologue rather than a full story, stretching setup across multiple episodes instead of delivering a satisfying sequel. At least that's my take on it.